Hello and welcome once again to another episode of Beyond the Table. We take a step back and talk about something that either we feel strongly about or think you should know that's either very related to tabletop RPGs or not at all related to tabletop RPGs or connected in a way that will hopefully make sense by the end of this episode. This is one of those episodes. This is the last one. We're going to talk about Warhammer 40,000, the in my opinion, most successful tabletop-related setting to ever exist. I would go so far as to say, whether you like it or not, it's the most successful fantasy sci-fi setting of this type ever made. And Alex, thank you for joining me for this. We're at a very special time in your travel through tabletop RPGs when a giant nerd explains Warhammer 40,000 to you, because it has to happen eventually.
Yeah. So just to give some context, I know little to nothing about Warhammer 40K. And the only reason this came up into conversation specifically was because I have started seeing edits of like Key and Peele skits into Warhammer 40K memes. And I'm like learning tidbits of Warhammer 40K solely through these edits. And I thought they were really funny. And I like showed them to Charlie and he was like, oh yeah, do you not know about this stuff? He's like, yeah, no, this stuff kind of tracks. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't know anything about it. I'm learning my lore through this. And he's like, oh, we need to have a sit down and we need to talk about this. And so here we are.
As someone who really enjoys the setting, but also thinks the setting is at its best when it's kind of viewed through the grim dank lens, not the grim dark lens, I really enjoy that Alex's first exposure to this is fucking YouTube shorts that are just kind of like almost like paper dolls that are placed over stuff. It is amazing that that's your first exposure to this. I love it. I'm envious because my exposure was someone I knew being like, yo, I got this book. It's got this murderous looking elf on it. And I'm like, I could spend way too much money on plastic figures to get into this hobby. Yeah, sure, fuck it. What's a 12-year-old know about fiscal responsibility? What's the worst that could happen? And here we are having this thing happen. So yes, Alex, we're going to talk about Warhammer 40,000, and I need you to keep two things in mind as we talk through all of this.
Okay.
The first one, the setting is satirical. It was designed to basically be, first off, hey, we kind of invented the concept of grimdark, or if they didn't completely invent it, they definitely kind of wrote the book and then a billion more books that are best viewed as like, yeah, this is kind of what grimdark is, meaning everything is terrible. The best day in the Warhammer 40,000 universe compared to like the worst day in our lives is still like night and day. The people of Warhammer 40,000 eat bread made from their dead friends, and that's a good day to them.
Yeah.
That is how ridiculously comically over the top and grimdark and just kind of like everything is shitty the setting is.
Which I have to say kind of makes sense because a good chunk of these edits I've watched also involve It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yep.
And I feel like those also make a lot of sense given the way you're explaining it now.
Everything you are saying is correct. Always Sunny has strong Warhammer 40,000 energy. I would go so far as to say all of the main characters from that are analogous of one of the Chaos Gods. We will get to that topic in a little bit.
There's an edit specifically that has each of the characters as some of these like Chaos Gods.
Yep.
Yes.
There are 4 Chaos Gods, and there are 4 main characters of Always Sunny, and I do not think that is a coincidence.
Oh, that's fucking
And for
great.
those curious, this is totally off topic, Frank is Be'lakor. That will make sense to like the 4 people that get that joke, but fine. Anyways, the second thing I need you to remember is that everything we're about to talk about was designed and written to sell overpriced plastic model kits. Do not ever forget that anything we're about to talk about's origin is, hey, if we write this shit, maybe people will buy more of our really overpriced plastic models. Never lose sight of that fact. Do not let the fact that there are easily, I want to say at least 200 books, like legitimate books, many of them numbering over 1,000 pages each,
Jeez.
that make up the lore of this setting. this was all designed and written and created to push roughly inch tall pieces of plastic you have to cut out of a sprue, glue together, and then paint yourself just so you can pretend to be a space general.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Do not forget those two things. So
I will not.
I'm never sure we start with this. Like, it's such a ridiculous setting. We're just going to start at the very beginning, I guess. So way back at the start of time, even before where we are in time, setting of Warhammer 40,000 is measured in millennia. Space is a vast place. It's gigantic. Shit happens. Takes a long time for it to happen with some frequency, except when it doesn't. And then it happens really quickly in very small areas. But way back at the start of timeline, what the timeline kind of refers to, the ancient history. So if current day Warhammer 40,000 is 40,000th millennia / 41st, 42nd, kind of in that rough timeline. Time's never been the franchise's strong suit. This is back in millennia 0, if not farther back. There are a bunch of godlike, toad-like beings of immense psychic power, and they're just kind of chilling.
Okay.
There are also a bunch of not immensely powerful godlike people called the Necron tier that, because their planet's a little bit too close to a star and stuff, have stupid short lifetimes and die of cancer, and eventually they get pissed off at this because they keep asking the old ones, the frog-like people, hey, can you like fix this whole situation for us? So they go to war, and through a variety of things that happen, eventually they sell their souls to some star gods and get cool-ass metal bodies, except the star gods steal their metal bodies, and they then kind of become this giant army of skeleton warriors, and through various retcons to sell more models, they pick up an Egyptian theme. It's kind of cool, but like they go to war with basically like the Cthulian equivalent of old ones if the old ones just looked like kind of froggish people. I'm saying froggish people because I enjoy that perspective of them. No one actually knows what the old ones look like.
Okay.
So, and while this is all happening, the old ones are doing kind of like, hey, we're an entire species of beings that ascended to godhood, et cetera, shit. They're like building dimensional gateways called the webways and shit like that. They're being super awesome mystic science people just doing all this cool stuff. And they are immensely powerful. And this is the only point in the Warhammer 40,000 timeline where you could say, you know, maybe things aren't shit. Unless they're the Necron tier, and then they are shit, so much so that, as I like to say, when God gives you a son too close that gives you cancer constantly, you find new gods, sell your soul, and murder the other gods that wouldn't help your ass out. So that happens, and something called the War in Heaven occurs, where it's cool robot skeleton people go into war with godlike beings for a variety of reasons that are way too complicated to get into here, but suffice to say, yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Shit ton of the god people get wiped out because, hey, it turns out the gods the Necron people sold their souls to really like eating them, and this whole war thing causes, if the main timeline happens called the Ethereum, there's kind of like an underside to it, the Stranger Things upside down, if you will, called the Warp, which is less a reflection of reality and more like hell and the afterlife and just kind of a big vacuous space full of energy that is impacted by events happening in the real world, if you will, kind of thing. Like it is technically a reflection in the same way that like the ripples at the edge of a pond are caused by the kind of rock being thrown in the center, but they've lost a lot of their shape and are very different. But so as part of this war, something called the Chaos Gods happen, but not all of them. There's 3 of them. I'm not quite sure what the order is. There's some debate about this, but you get the kind of original 3. You get Zeech, Nurgle, and Khorne.
Okay.
You know all 3 of these because I'm sure you know Blood for the Blood God, Skulls for the Skull Throne, because I say that occasionally.
Yeah, you do. You've said
Yes.
that quite a few times. And now I know where that comes from because you said that before and I didn't know the reference.
Yes. Yeah, so Khorne is the god of murder and kind of combat. He is very specific in what he wants out of life. He wants you to always be fighting, always be murdering. Blood for the Blood God, Skulls for the Skull Throne. Hail Corn.
Okay.
Very straightforward, no nonsense god. Then you have Nurgle, aka Papa Nurgle, aka Grandpa, who is the god of death and decay and entropy and disease. And if Khorne is portrayed as kind of like the most edgelordy, blackest of black suits of armor ever on a throne made of skulls that's constantly on fire in like literal hell, Nurgle is portrayed more as kind of like a large blobular creature that's like if every disease got together and had a sentient body, like a mouthful of maggots type of thing. These gods don't really have distinct actual shapes, just kind of representations kind of thing, because they're as much concept as thing. And the third one that comes around during this time period is something called Zeech, who's the god of change and lies and magic and trickery. And Zeech's plans are so complicated that occasionally Zeech is working against himself to work for himself. Like, this is a being that's plans involve him double-crossing himself 9 times to get to the end goal type of thing. Like, the people that are fans of Zeech will annoyingly say shit like, just as planned, when they lose in the actual tabletop game, and you want to punch them because it's like, no, you lost. Yes, just as planned. I will break your minis. Just take the L and shut the fuck up.
All according to Keikaku?
Basically, yeah. Correct, yeah. And you don't realize how accurate you are in that one, because if the other two were kind of as I described, Zeech is often described as like bird-like with some frequency, but also like, because he's the god of change, he's like all tentacles and never constant shape and shit like that. Again, none of these things have a constant shape. They just kind of have a concept of, if you will. And each one is fed by what's happening in the real world. Like, now that war is a thing, Khorne's sitting there being like, oh, I'm getting a sip of all these souls, and kind of like, yeah, this is worship indirectly towards me. And like, hey, these people got cancer. That goes to Nurgle, and backstabbing and scheming and lies and trickeries. He's just sitting there kind of rubbing his hands together, being like, yes, just as planned. And Khorne's looking at him being like, you can shut the fuck up, you bird nerd. The gods also don't like each other that much. They have beef, like, where Khorne is very straightforward and thinks you should just punch your friend to death for sacrifice to him. Zeech wants you to go about the most convoluted, like, Rube Goldbergian approach possible, so they don't get along well. And as I said, Nurgle's nickname is Grandpa with some frequency, so he's kind of like, of the three at this point in time, neutral. Like, people die, people get sick, things decay. Fuck it. Like, they all make their way to Nurgle eventually type of thing. Like, a win for the other two is still kind of a win for Nurgle, because, hey, probably someone died in the process at some point. Now, I'm going to engage in some heresy at this, which is a concept we'll cover a little bit farther down the line for this. There is kind of an interpretation of the gods where, like, it's, yes, this is pure chaos propaganda at this point, but yes, there is a way of looking at all of the chaos gods through a kind of, like, positive lens. And remember the first thing I asked you to remember through all of this?
That everything is a, like, comedic setting or something like that, or some parody of itself.
Yes, like, it is comedically terrible. So
yeah, it's comedically bad. Yes.
Yeah, like, so if you ever find yourself wondering, like, hey, why would I want to, like, deal myself up with a god that's like, his blessings will make me sprout tentacles and 6 eyes and, like, turn my dick into a rooster? It's because that's actually better than your life may have been previously. Like, that's how bad day-to-day life is in the setting for most people. Like, the chance of, like, transcending your shitty existence is worth selling your soul and probably a few hundred other people's souls to one of these powers for a chance to not be shit anymore. Like, and again, like, for a pure heresy propaganda at this point, there are positive ways of looking at them. Like, death is inevitable. Like, Nurgle does take away pain. Like, he'll turn you into a walking biobomb, but you're gonna feel fine the entire time you're a walking biobomb. Like, there's something to be said for, like, if you spent your entire existence in, like, horrific back-breaking labor and have horrible pains for that, a god that's like, hey, in exchange for taking your pain away, you're gonna, like, occasionally sneeze out some bees. Does that work for you? That might be a deal you take.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And people accidentally find themselves as chaos worshippers all the time. They all are, despite Khorne being direct, they all have kind of a trickiness to them. Like, if you hate your friend enough or hate your enemy enough, like, and you kill him, Korn's being like, hey, you really hated that guy an awful lot. Didn't it feel good to murder him? Have you thought about murdering more people? But yeah, that's kind of the three chaos gods that exist vaguely in this time span. So time goes on. We start kind of catching up to the modern-ish day of things. And Millennium 1 happens, stuff starts getting better on Earth, kind of roughly runs through the timeline that you and I are in as real people. Like, it's not a one-for-one thing, but like, given the way the setting works, you can both assume and not assume that all things that happened on Earth do or don't happen however the fuck you want them to. Like, they were so long ago, they don't matter. And by M15, we have reached for the stars, starting to colonize space, and a time period called the Dark Age of Technology has begun, and humans are kind of starting to get good at this space thing and stuff like that. And we're now going to jump from this to a larger concept. Within Warhammer, there are three factions. There's Xenos, which are aliens. You have the Imperium, which is humans, and you have Chaos, which are the forces of the Chaos gods and kind of allied with them. We'll talk about that more in a minute. While this is while kind of all these events are happening, you have the Xenos factions, and they don't get along with each other. It's just kind of a useful category for them. You have things called the Eldar, or the Eldari, if you want to be copyright specific enough that Games Workshop can own the concept of elves in space. That's where that name comes from. I grew up with them being called Eldar. This whole Eldari bullshit is bullshit in my book, but yeah. So they and the settings version of orcs actually date back to, remember that war between the Necrons and the Great Old Ones that kind of caused all the shitty stuff to start happening after the fact?
Yes.
Well, the Old Ones made the Eldar and what were called the Korks at the time, Kork, to basically fight the Necron tier. And as a result of this, the Eldar, who are space elves, have just been kind of left alone at this point. They've had multiple millennia to just kind of be the literal dominant species in the galaxy by, like, not even a contest type of thing. Like, they are so the top of the universe that it doesn't matter. Like, they are capable of singing buildings into existence by singing to trees or like stuff. They have like, they're capable of technologies beyond anything humanity ever gets up to, and they're all yoga masters, and they've reached spiritual enlightenment, and they have the perfect technology, and they can traverse the webway and stuff like that. Like, they are the chosen ones of the Old Ones. And yeah, the Korks are going through the process of de-evolving through all of this. They become orcs, which are just green soccer hooligans in space that love to murder things and have cool other things going on, but we're probably not going to talk about them that much because they're only kind of important to this whole bullshit we're talking through. But yes, so the Eldar start to get kind of, let's say, bored around this time. When you are quite literally the best at what you do, and your whole culture is based around artistry, and you have impossibly long lives, and like everyone is a multiple award-winning scholar and poet and sculptor and painter, you start getting into some weird shit. And this spans a very long time. That's why I'm bringing it up now. But basically, in the background of all the events we're going to be talking about, think about, like, there's a giant galaxy spanning civilization in the background, just murder, torture, fucking constantly.
Oh wait, what? Huh?
The Eldar go from kind of like, and they never really lose their edge, but like, they get real into like the worst version of BDSM because they find out ways to like bring people back from the dead. So like, you can just murder someone, but not just like murder some of them, like uber murder someone and then bring them back, and it's fine. And that's all just kind of happening in the background. They go from this hyper evolved, super psychic, awesome like culture to the same people with the same abilities with some real depraved tastes going on.
Oh,
keep in mind that that's kind of ticking away in the background some, constantly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So M15 rolls around, kind of humanity gets to the zenith of its kind of technology, and things are awesome. And from M15 to M25, M26, how you think about it, things are the best humans ever get type of thing. We're exploring the stars. We're awesome. We have robots. What exactly happens in this time has been lost to historical records because, hey, it turns out when your culture takes a massive nosedive culturally, you tend to lose some of this stuff. So humans go from a spacefaring civilization to there are millions of colonized planets all over the galaxy that have suddenly been cut off from Earth. And there's just kind of stuff out there. And this happens around M25, M26 because things are getting bad. Like, it's not clear it's like what caused the downfall, but things are getting bad and kind of people are out there and stuck. And remember I mentioned the Eldar in the background of all this were kind of doing their the kinkiest kinks possible thing?
Yes, the like necrophilia stuff.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's like it's any possible thing you can do in life to excess. Like, they're not just doing heroin, they're doing like ultra turbo heroin. Like, it's anything that can be turned all the way up to 11, they found the 12 kind of situation. Like,
gotcha.
And as a result of this, they managed to kind of, whatever the fuck you want to call that, a fourth chaos god into existence, who is called Slaanesh, who is the god of excess. Often she gets branded with kind of being the god of sex and debauchery, which is not true because he's kind of about way much more than that. Like, it's almost kind of like if you take pleasure in an activity, regardless of that pleasure, kind of like almost prideful pleasure in something. Like, if you're a really good puzzle maker and like you take great pleasure in putting together those puzzles, that's kind of points to Slaanesh at that point, like, because they are born of that type of mentality, I guess. Like, they are born of, hey, we have this psychic race that like has gone to the deepest levels of kind of seeking that shit, and they found something terrible, and by their psychic powers combined, hey, a fourth chaos god now exists. And have you seen the movie There Will Be Blood?
I have not. No.
Are you familiar with the milkshake line?
No.
So Slaanesh pulls out a metaphorical straw, shoves it deep into basically the giant populations of the Eldari, and goes, I drink your milkshake, I drink it all up, and sucks down 90% of the population's souls, give or take. Like, mass extinction event.
Okay.
And Eldar only survive for two reasons. One, a bunch of Eldar seeing, hey, there's some, like, this is wrong. Like, we are way too into this pleasure-seeking stuff. Like, maybe we should, like, ease it back some. Have basically fled society in these giant planet-sized ships called craft worlds, or they have found planets to settle on and become farmers. The Eldar go Amish, basically.
Okay.
Some of them do. Some of them go off in spaceships and try and, like, live, I don't want to say, like, almost like monastic style lives, but kind of they find purpose through order and training, and kind of they have, like, variety is the spice of life. Like, don't dedicate yourself to one thing because you might get prideful in that, and that's, we'll get into that later. But yeah, so other chunk of Eldar that exists kind of rebrand and become the Drukhari, or as I grew up with them being called, the Dark Eldar. And they look at what led to Slaanesh being murder fucked into existence and go, I don't want to stop doing that, I just don't want to die because of that. And they found /find/flee to this kind of port city of the Eldar, kind of pocketed away in the warp, safe from Slaanesh. And in a setting where everyone is the bad guy, the Dark Eldar Drukhari are the, like, baddest of guys. Their whole thing is, like, they're like, okay, so yeah, the craft world people and the Exodites, they managed to figure out how to, like, keep their souls away from Slaanesh. We found out that you can replenish your soul by kidnapping people, and if you torture them right, you replenish your soul. So that slow kind of bleed soul thing we have going on, we'll just top it off by making other people's lives terrible.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's happening in the background. And back to Earth. So while the Eldar I guess, like, worth mentioning too, to put kind of the power of the Chaos Gods on level, Slaanesh kills basically all the Eldar gods, and like these are real gods, like gods the Eldar interact with some frequency. Nurgle winds up keeping one of them in a cage in his kind of labyrinth, and he feeds her horrible toxins he brews up that can be released on the world as plagues. Unimportant, it's a kind of a cool detail and to give you a sense of how powerful these things are. Like Slash 1v50s a bunch of godlike beings and like no sweats it type of thing. Like just walks through it being like, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, and I'm gonna eat your hearts now.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're gonna jump to Earth. Around this time, there's something called the Age of Strife happening, where humanity has fallen apart. We've gotten real bad at things. This concept of techno-barbarians. We're on Earth. It's basically Mad Max, but like with chunks of spacefaring technology around. And it is at this point where a being known as the Emperor, well, I guess technically to become known as the Emperor of Mankind, he's not the Emperor of Mankind yet, Big E, if you will, has decided the time is right to unify humanity and kind of do his thing. He's been chilling on Earth for some amount of time. It's not really clear how long, but like the implication is that like he's just been around this entire time, like going back since early human days. And this is really weird because the dude's like between 8 and 10 feet tall and just ripped constantly and like maybe glows, but also is a master psychic being. So what you see of him may not even be real. And this is where I suspect we start to run into things that you may be kind of familiar with. Like, I assume you've heard the phrase the God Emperor.
Yes, I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
This is that character. He is often portrayed as this dark-haired, sometimes black, sometimes brown, long-haired, just ripped, chiseled from stone dude in this giant, ornate kind of knightly, kind of sci-fi-y golden armor, often with a flaming sword, maybe with some cool guns type of thing. And he does some stuff, makes a deal with some chaos gods, gains some knowledge, and he sets out to unify humans by first making things called the Thunder Warriors, which are unimportant, but they're kind of the predecessor to a concept you're familiar with called the Space Marines. But basically, his first round of super soldiers goes great. They're super great at shock troops. They do a fantastic job of killing anyone that opposes him. Like, sorry, if you're not picking it up on this, like right now, Big E is not much of negotiating. He's just gonna kind of might makes right his way through unifying humanity on Earth. There's not a lot of nuance to what he goes about doing. Basically, it's join my side or die horribly. I don't really care which, because I have the only unified army right now, and also, hey, look, super soldiers.
Gotcha.
While this is also all happening, he is going through and destroying religion. Like, there's a fantastic short story called The Last Church, which I think is one of the most interesting pieces of kind of like, to take this back to tabletop RPGs in general right now. I think Warhammer 40,000 is a fantastic setting. Like, there's a lot to be learned from it, despite its many problems and kind of inconsistencies. There's something to be said for kind of just the scope and the level of buy-in. Like, you know shit about it and you don't know anything about it simultaneously. Again, it has successfully permeated pop culture in ways that I'm not sure anything of this nature really has. Like, and again, it was created to sell plastic toys. This didn't have like a movie like Star Wars had to back it up. This is for tabletop wargaming.
Yes.
But yeah. So The Last Church is a great kind of example of the statesman side of Emperor. And basically it's this fantastic short story of him having a conversation with the last, not really clear, but heavily implied to be Christian of some denomination or Catholic of some denomination, priest and the last church on Earth before guy gets murdered and the church gets burned down, because Big E is a man of science and reason, and in a setting where there are not one god, but 4 gods, and they are very real and very dangerous, taking the stance of we don't do religion because don't talk to gods, period, made sense to him. there's a lot of ways you can shoot holes in Big E's whole kind of philosophy on this one, but basically, to avoid the chaos gods getting their fingers into humanity, his solution is we're just not going to believe in gods, period. Like ultra atheism as a weapon, almost.
Oh, okay.
And it kind of works. Like, we'll get to that. We'll get to the kind of in a couple of minutes. But yeah, so Emperor unifies Earth and says, okay, cool. I am now going to use, like, we're going to wipe out the Thunder Warriors. I'm going to make some things. While the shit is going on, he at some point makes something called the Custodes, or the kind of his personal bodyguard. They are, depending on how you look at it, the most super soldier of the super soldiers made in this setting are the Custodes in some way. They are 8-foot tall dudes that walk around in golden armor and have, like, chain gun spears. Like, the weapons of Warhammer are already ridiculous, and the Custodes take it a couple steps further than you'd think, type of thing. Like, it's very common to see them with, like, a double barrel hand cannon on, like, an 8-foot glaive weapon, and them just, like, one-handing it.
Oh.
In lore, one Custode looks at an army of 1,000 people and goes, if I want this to be fair, I guess I gotta tie my hand behind my back. Yeah. So, Custodes exist. They're around. They're kind of the personal guard and super elite of the Emperor. Sometime around this time, he makes these things called Space Marines that you are familiar with. They are the typical angry face Space Marines. They're kind of bulky. They got big shoulder pads. You know what a Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine looks like, I assume.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Yes. They are in many ways the ubiquitous Space Marine. So, and that's why another tangent so quickly. This is the part where actually you know more about Warhammer 40,000 than you realize you know. Because you've played StarCraft.
Oh, okay.
So, you know the joke about how Blizzard doesn't really create anything new, they just kind of take other people's ideas and perfect them?
Yeah.
I don't know the full story of this, so I'm not going to go into this, and it's kind of got some weird murkiness to it. But the Terran of Warhammer 40,000, specifically the Space Marines of it, are heavily based off of Warhammer 40,000 Space Marines. The Zerg are based off an alien race called the Tyranids, and the Protoss are basically Eldar in a kind of like, okay, they don't have mouths and they're more psychic and more alien type of way, but there was a relationship between Blizzard and Games Workshop, and it soured, and then StarCraft happened.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There are a lot of people very mad at Warcraft because the orcs of Warcraft are heavily based off of... Oh, by the way, there's a fantasy version of all this bullshit designed to sell a line of fantasy war game pieces.
Wait, there's even more now? Wait,
oh,
what?
Yeah. There are two Warhammers. There's Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Fantasy, and now there's Age of Sigmar. Basically, for the original Warhammer was a fantasy setting game with a bunch of other stuff. I actually like that setting more, but Warhammer 40,000, because space is cool, is the significantly more successful one and the much more well-known one. And there's some other stuff, but maybe someday we talk about the fantasy setting, and you get to and I get to talk about one of, if not the greatest fantasy settings ever made, ever, for anything like this. It is one of the best. You can shoot holes in it for a variety of reasons, again, as you can with any fantasy setting, from a setting designed to sell you plastic war miniatures. It goes too hard. It goes way harder than it needs to, and it's amazing. But I digress. Back to Emps and his Space Marines. So while he's building the Space Marines, he also builds these things called Primarchs. Have you heard the phrase Primarch before?
Yes.
So there are 20 Primarchs. All right, so the Primarchs are, and they're associated with legions that go along with them, are the First Legion, the Dark Angels. Their Primarch is Lionel Johnson. The Second Legion has been deleted from history. There are 2 legions that have been deleted from history because reasons we'll talk about eventually. Third Legion is Emperor's Children. They're led by Fulgrim. The Fourth Legion is the Iron Warriors, led by Peter Turbo, depending on how you pronounce his name and how memey you want to be on the topic. The Fifth Legion is the White Scars, led by Jagatai Khan. They are basically the Mongol horde. Like, they ride motorcycles instead of horses, but like their whole thing is gotta go fast. The 6th Legion is the Space Wolves, led by Lemon Russ or Lehman Russ, and they are just war criminals pretending to be Vikings. I'm not kidding. They their home planet is called Fenris.
Okay. Like the
wolf.
Yeah, that's what I thought. The wolf.
I have a special love for Lehman Russ because he's just like so over the top. Like the dude has maybe wolf fangs and like was literally raised by wolves. We'll get to that in a second. Next up, we have the Imperial Fists for the 7th Legion, led by Rogel Dorn. Next up, we have the Night Lords of the 8th Legion, led by Conrad Kurz. Another favorite legion in Primarch for reasons we may get to. 9th Legion is the Blood Angels, led by Sanguinius. Sanguinius is interesting because he has literal angel wings. Like, he also may be a vampire technically, but he also literally has angel wings.
Oh.
Yeah. Then we have the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands, led by Ferris Manus. 11th Legion, Lost to Time again. We'll talk about it in a second. 12th Legion is the World Eaters, led by Angron. I guess I'll go into the joke right now because you'll enjoy it. What does the word Angron sound like?
Angry?
Yeah, that's kind of his whole personality.
Okay, so he's just mad all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of weird they named the angry guy Angron, huh?
Yeah, no, it's kind of weird how that tracks, yeah.
I mean, in his defense, he's angry because he has things called the butcher nails driven into his head that, like, drive him to murder people, but, like, yeah. Welcome to the naming conventions of Warhammer 40,000 and Games Workshop. The 13th Legion is the Ultramarines, led by Rabute Gilliman, the only man to commit tax fraud because he can and then turn in the money afterwards because he's still a good guy.
Oh, well, that's...
Yes, he'd be more doing it to expose the weaknesses of the taxing system, but we'll talk about him in a minute or two, probably in more depth. Next up, the 14th Legion is the Death Guard, led by Mortarion, followed by the 15th Legion, the Thousand Suns, led by Magnus the Red. The 16th Legion is the Lunar Wolves that became the Sons of Horus, led by Horus Lupercal. Remember that name will become important very soon.
Okay.
The 17th Legion is the Word Bearers, led by Lorgar Aurelian. The 18th Legion is the Salamanders, led by Vulcan, and they are pyromaniacs. Like, they are, yeah, they come from a fire world, and that's kind of their whole thing. Raven Guard is the 19th Legion, led by Corvus Corax, and last but not least, we have the Alpha Legion, the 20th Legion, led by Alfarius Omegon, who may or may not be two people. He's had a lot of retcons that have happened around him, so he may have actually, he was initially one person, and now he is twins. So all these Primarchs get made, they get put in their fancy super science bassinets, and the Chaos Gods, seeing this, go, whoa, 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 whoa. No. And they grab all the baby Primarchs and throw them into the warp. And the baby Primarchs wind up scattered across the galaxy. And Big E is pissed, and he goes, well, that sucks, but, like, man, I got all these Space Marines I made off them, I guess, around too. So, gathers forces, reaches out to Mars, retakes Mars. Mars is full of people called the Adeptus Mechanicus. They are a bunch of technology-worshipping monsters, is the most kind thing I can say about them. Have you ever heard the joke about how disgusting, the moment you learned about human weakness, it disgusted you? You crave the purity of steel?
No, I haven't heard that one, actually.
I don't think that quote's actually technically from them. I think that's actually from our dear friend our dear friends in the Iron Hands, but that's them. Like, they are prone to elongating their lives through cyborg technology, and they're important from a lore standpoint and a variety of other things. Only going to bring them up because humans have not gotten technologically back to where they were before Big E started rising. We're better than we were, kind of thing. Like, we're no longer technological barbarians, but, like, Mars is literally full of a bunch of people in robes that worship technology so aggressively that they don't invent anything anymore because there's so much good technology out there. It is, in their views, an affront to God, the Omnissiah, or kind of the supreme machine spirit, to not just use what already exists because it's already so fucking perfect. So it's a planet of mad scientists that only build model kits, basically. Model kits of giant actual murder robots, but nothing new gets made anymore. So Big E makes it to Mars, recaptures it, kind of makes a deal with them, joins forces with them. Oh, I forgot to mention this. When that whole kind of baby snatching thing happened and Slaanesh got birthed, his birth ripped a giant hole in the universe called the Eye of Terror. A literal gate, like a giant like space hole to hell and or the warp, depending on how you want to think about it. Like, and it causes massive warp storms, makes flying through the immaterial, makes flying around impossible, super dangerous. Demons are popular. Oh, there's literal demons in this setting, by the way, too. They just kind of show up when holes in existence happen.
Oh, cool. So they're okay. Cool. Just we're adding the demons now.
Yes, each chaos god has demons that follow them, and they range from lesser demons to some real badass things that are capable of taking out entire armies. And there's other stuff that lives in the warp too, it turns out, but they're not super important to understanding the setting. But yeah, so giant gaping hole in the galaxy, warp storms everywhere, making it impossible to get around. During the kind of things start to subside some, Big E has kind of unified Earth. And he sets off into the stars to reclaim his kids. And going planet by planet, he tracks them down. Each one has kind of had a bit of a luck of the draw of where they wound up. Some people, like Gilliman, managed to wind up on planets that were basically kind of like, hey, it's basically Rome, and the Primarchs are a really weird thing because they grow into like 8-foot tall super hunks in the span of like 3 months upon exiting their like super technological bassinets, and despite being like a year or two old, have I've been studying this shit forever intellect levels. Like, they are the ultimate super soldiers, if you will, type of thing. Like, every obnoxious thing you can claim about like someone's badly written super soldier thing is a Primarch in one way or another kind of thing. They're super strong, they're super smart, they're super resistant to dying, and they're super good at whatever they do type of thing. Each one has a specialty. Some have specialty powers. Remember when I said Rabute Gilliman was kind of like a guy who would commit tax fraud just to prove he could, and then like would correct it and stuff like that?
Yes, I remember.
His superpower is accounting.
Huh?
I wish I wasn't really making that up, but I'm also kind of making it up. Like, he is a master statesman, but like also he is a master like logistics person. Like, yeah.
Okay.
Compared to, like, I mentioned Sanguinius, who has prophecies of the future and literal angel wings. Like, not everyone gets the same hand of useful powers. Peter Turbo, he can look at things and instantly know how they will fail or how they fall apart, basically, which turns him into like a master inventor because he can look at things and like see how it's going to break and can fix it and stuff like that. And everyone has their own kind of little special powers, some of them more so than others type of thing. Not really important for this conversation, but basically everyone there's a lot of duplication. Like, so I guess go back to Sanguinius for a second. Sanguinius and Conrad Kurz kind of have the same power. They both can see the future, but because of their upbringings, they have very different reactions to it. Sanguinius kind of looks at it as a positive and sees the positive of it. Conrad Kurz sees it as kind of an unescapable fate, and like you're bound to fate and stuff like that, and isn't that terrible, and didn't grow up on the best circumstances. I guess, like, to go back to how ridiculous the setting is, Sanguinius went to a planet called Baal. It's not bad, it's not amazing, but it's not terrible. Conrad Kurz winds up on a planet the sun never rises on. That's one giant city of like murder hobos. And growing up becomes Batman. He goes by the name the Night Haunter, but like, if you know Conrad Kurz's whole thing, you understand why like DC made Batman doesn't murder like a whole thing, because hey, it turns out Batman that thinks murder is actually the solution to things is a fucking nightmare. Like, Conrad Kurz's whole policy is, if I kill and skin the right gang leaders, that will demoralize the rest of the gang leaders, and then crime will be over. not because people are better, but because I have skinned and murdered and tortured my way through enough people that we are all now afraid to commit crime.
That's fucking great.
Yeah. Again, you have two people that have kind of similar powers. Their upbringings influence them some. Sanguinius, not so bad a planet. Conrad Kurz literally grows up on a I got something worse than a prison world. It's not even a prison world. It's just like a constant gang warfare planet. Yeah, and this is all kind of side details you don't need to know, but kind of helps flesh things out some. Like Lehman Russ is literally a Viking, basically. Like he comes from the planet of Fenris. The Space Wolves and Lehman Russ's whole thing is that they are kind of cosplaying as Vikings. They're not actual Vikings. Some very good points of like, they're kind of like that guy that goes out and buys like 5 axes from the mall and several Thor's hammers and goes like, but my Viking heritage. I'm not knocking that guy because I kind of am that guy, and that's why I kind of like the Space Wolves, but like, they're not really Vikings. They're just people that think Vikings are cool and have read like a Wikipedia article on them. Yeah. All of these things have cultural influence, so I think is kind of neat, but unimportant to our conversation now. So Emps goes around, tracks down his kids who have now grown up and are kind of either are ruling or are kind of in insane situations. Like Angron got thrown to the slave pits and has been a gladiator basically his entire life and gets scooped up by Big E right when he's about to die valiantly with a bunch of his comrades trying to overthrow the local government. Never quite gets over the fact he's not allowed to die bravely with his friends and comrades and stuff. And that's a topic we'll get to in a minute. But so Big E goes around, grabs all these people, or kind of reconnects with his kids, and then sets them off on cleaning the galaxy of non-human species. They have 2 jobs. If it's a human world, get them into the Empire. Like, they are part of the Imperium. They are humans. They are under my rule. Let them understand that. And if they don't do that, blow their planet up, basically.
Okay.
And do whatever needs to happen in between those 2 things to get that to happen. Like, we don't want to blow up these planets, but let them understand we absolutely can. And the second thing is, if you find anything alien, anything at all, murder stomp it into the ground. This is where the part of the satire that a lot of people seem to glaze over happens, where there's some real human supremacy shit going on, and this is where the no, the Imperium's the bad guys. Why? They are mouth-frothingly racist.
Oh, no.
Against anything that's not human. Like, yeah, the average Imperial citizen's reaction to upon seeing anything, like, not human is to probably murder it.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, this is some, like, it gets spun and, like, it's viewed from a variety of ways because it only highlights kind of when the Imperium goes after a variety of, like, probably evil species. Like, they're definitely doing some Chaos God shit or worse. Like, there just seems to be some fuckery going on during this whole time period that, like, does not justify what's being done, but, like, again, you can get it a little bit. Like, when you come across a planet of demon-worshipping snake people, the time for diplomacy is probably over before it even begins.
Huh.
So, this is all happening. A variety of people get exposed to various cultures. Some people pick up demonic swords, etc., etc. Some people start resenting Big E more and more for just being an absolutely terrible father. And I say that because the Primarchs don't really know why they're doing this, and the major reason in the background is that Big E has basically decided that if everyone who knows about the Chaos Gods is dead, then no one knows about the Chaos Gods, and then they have no power. And maybe that would have worked, but it's not really clear if it would have, given how things worked. But suffice to say, because of lack of communication and just kind of neglect, if you will, some rumblings happen. And eventually, the Primarch gets split down the middle, basically. About half of them go traitor, and about half of them remain loyal. And an event called the Horus Heresy happens. We're now going to power run through because there are, I think it's like 13 1,000+ page books that tell the story of what the fuck happened during this 10-year period. Because, of course, there are. And I'm not kidding. Like, it's a very short period of time. I think it literally is almost like Let me double check on this. I think it really is almost like 10 years. Okay, so yeah, remember when I said that the timeline of this thing's covered in millennia? We're now at 30th, 31st millennia when the Horus Heresy kicks off. The Traitor Legions, led by Horus Lupercal, who through a lot of fuckery, that Lorgar guy who really just wanted to believe in a god, has been whispering some shit in his ears and has totally gone in on that whole chaos god thing. Like it turns out that if you have a member, like a high ranking, if you have a Primarch that's really into like worshiping the Emperor as a god, and rather than explaining to him like maybe why you shouldn't do that, you just say, no, atheism is the way, shut up, nerd. Maybe he goes off and finds some gods that don't say shut up, nerd to him constantly, leads to half of your kids turning on you and declaring war, and this is when things all go to shit. So seeing this, I'll run another Traitor Legions, I go into this in detail, I guess. So on the side that's still loyal to the Emperor, you have the Dark Angels, White Scars, Space Wolves, Imperial Fists, Blood Angels, Iron Hands, Ultramarines, and the Raven Guard. Oh, and the Salamanders. On the opposing side, you have the Emperor's Children, the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, the World Eaters, the Death Guard, the Thousand Sons, the Luna Wolves, now the Sons of Horus, led by Horus Lupercal, the guy in charge of all of this, the World Bearers, and the Alpha Legion. This is also where it's assumed that, like, the two deleted from history Primarchs are like, oh, if you want to be a self-insert for Chaos or a self-insert for the Imperium, hey, you get to be the second or the 11th Primarch. Go you. It's not clear which one's on which side, although there are a couple ones kind of hint one way or the other. But yes, this is where that whole duality comes then. Like, so I mentioned Pederabo's whole thing is he can, like, look at stuff and know how it fails. Rogel Dorn's whole thing is he can look at stuff and know how to build. Like, he's a really good builder. And one is the master of siege warfare, the other one is the master of fortification, and you start seeing clashes. And not everyone has an exact comparison, but, like, again, like where you have Sanguinius and Conrad Curze being kind of the opposite versions of each other, you have some of that stuff going on. Like, you have parallels that exist. And the Traitors are kind of winning for a little while. Like, they are, through a variety of, so I did not make this joke previously, I regret doing this. This is a setting where everyone looks at the Geneva Convention and goes, but if I don't do those things, how do I win a war? And now that you have half the faction with literal eldritch horror gods on their side type of thing, all kinds of fucked up shit starts happening. Now, there's a variety of kind of big events that happen, something called the Drop Site Massacre, like a variety of planets get burned, a lot of people get betrayed, shit tons of people die, a lot of them Space Marines, and again, relatively short period of time. Like, this is not a long period of time. I think it literally is almost a decade that this all takes place in. Like, it's a very short set of events type of thing. Like, and it's, again, the cross space stuff takes time, but basically, Horus and his forces push humanity, depending on how you think about it, back to Earth. They're kind of making their final assault. While they were off cleansing the galaxy and doing the whole crusade thing, the Emperor's building what's called the Golden Throne. We'll talk about that in a second, but very long, multiple books explaining it in great detail. Someone's screaming, hey, you should talk more about the whole Horus Heresy thing. Eventually, Big E warps up to Horus's ship. Horus has killed Sanguinius. Most of the Primarchs on both sides are dead or in bad shape at this point. Most do not survive through this type of thing. Actually, most of the traitors do. Most of the loyalists don't. We'll talk about that later. And in honorable melee combat, the Emperor manages to slay Horus, but receives grievous wounds and is placed on Earth / entombed / imprisoned / sentenced to a life of constant torture on what's called the Golden Throne. The Golden Throne, which creates something called the Astronomicon, basically like a lighthouse that you can use to do the navigating through the Hell Dimension. Do you know the movie Event Horizon?
It sounds familiar, but I don't remember watching.
About 1997, the spaceship uses kind of a portal to go and goes through basically literal hell. I think the director got out there and talked about, it's basically Warhammer 40,000 early days movie type of thing. Like, that movie is the closest Warhammer 40,000 has to there being a major motion picture that kind of links to it. It's in no way linked up to it, but like the idea of, hey, we're going to cross like giant chunks of space by just dipping into hell a little bit and kind of using that to move around real fast. That's how the warp works. And it's incredibly dangerous. And there's a bunch of other stuff that if you want to do more of these, we can talk about at a later date, but just know the best way to space travel in this setting is to just kind of punch a hole in reality, dive into hell and surface somewhere else and hope it goes for the best. There's some fuckery that happens with that. It's possible for ships to arrive before they leave, and bad things also happen when you do that, and yada, yada, yada. But the Astronomicon kind of helps be a lighthouse and guide people through that. So where things stand, you have the Emperor of Mankind, who is basically dead, strapped to a giant throne thing that's keeping him alive. Maybe doesn't need to be, but that's a whole other separate topic. In his palace in Tibet on Earth, kind of stuck in a perpetual state of undeath, death, and things are in shambles. Half of the what would make sense to be the next people in charge have been declared traitor and are off running for their lives at this point. The siege failed. They're going to run. Over the next couple centuries, a couple of them die, a couple of them go a little bit crazy, a couple of them, because of their association with chaos gods, become literal demons.
Oh.
Yeah. Like they become demon princes or demon primarchs and gain some powers. And for a long time, both in setting and actually in the real world from a like model perspective, there were no primarchs out in the galaxy. That is, since I started playing, actually changed. Like, when I started playing and being aware of all this shit, the primarchs were kind of a concept. Like, a couple of them were like, oh, allegedly so-and-so is alive on this planet. Or like, when the end times come, Lehman Russ will come back from so-and-so and do things. But like, they were kind of folk heroes, and enough time has passed, like literally 10,000 years had passed. People are pretty sure they existed, but also like, how many U.S. presidents do you know like existed, but like you couldn't name or have no real concept of? Kind of that situation. That's only been, in some cases, a couple hundred years. Like, imagine you live on some back-ass farming planet that didn't get touched by the war at all, and people are like, yeah, the Primarchs, and you're like, yeah, the Primarchs, bet those existed. But yeah, so Millennium 40,000, Millennium 40 happens, where the Warhammer 40,000 comes from, in Warhammer 40,000, or the 40,000 and Warhammer 40,000 comes from, I guess, more accurately. That is the setting for a long time. And in the time since I started playing, a couple Primarchs have come back, a couple of them have woken up. The meta has moved forward, and while this is all going on, you have the Imperium kind of trying very hard to not fall the fuck apart. Turns out that when you had a crazed military leader that had godlike powers, there's a bit of a power vacuum that gets left over when he mostly dies, and the one thing the Emperor did not want to happen the most happens. There's literally a church that pops up around him, and that's where the Imperium versus Chaos versus Xeno kind of trifecta comes in. Because on one hand, you have the Imperium and the various factions that make up the Imperium. On the other hand, you have the forces of chaos, which are demons, traitor legions, traitor primarchs, and a couple other things sprinkled in there. And then you have all the other fucking aliens that are kicking around in the setting that are kind of off doing their own things. And they are indeed doing their own things. And just so we're clear, the Imperium's not just super soldiers. In fact, it's mostly just normal people, which is where one of the faction armies called the Imperial Guard come through, which is just basically... have you seen the movie Starship Troopers?
Yes. I love that movie, by the way.
It is basically Starship Troopers. There's an entire army that's basically just people with, like, laser guns, completely outgunned by everything. And in the actual physical gameplay, it's just, like, you bring a shit ton of them. They're cheap and they die, but, like, if you shoot something 40 times, maybe something will kill it. And that brings us to kind of the now, if you will. And in the power... So you have that power vacuum left on the human side where things got shittier, and you have a church pop up, and a variety of corrupt magistrates are happening, and every planet's kind of doing its own thing, and you have something literally called the Inquisition happening, whose job is to root out heresy and Xenos and other stuff amongst the sacred Imperium traditions and super murder them. And occasionally they blow up planets for being a little too heretical. And this is where nerds yelling heresy comes from, with a little bit too much meaning behind it. And again, this is where kind of some of the stuff, people missing the whole satire part of it. Like, this is where the real God Emperor shit comes from.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So then on the opposite side, you have the chaos forces that have all kind of splintered. Each one of the traitor factions kind of becomes its own thing with its own leaders, but also, like, if there's a main unifying force, there's a guy named Abaddon who was second in command to Horus when Horus died. There's a lot more to it than that, but like, he's grown incredibly powerful, and he's kind of the one leading the charge, and he wants to kill the Emperor still. He wants to make sure the Emperor dies, type of thing. And there's a couple of fun fan theories that are actually like, no, actually Abaddon and the Emperor are on the same side, because, like, to be reborn as a god, the Emperor has to fully die, and, like, Abaddon's trying to do the good thing. I don't know if this is actually a real, like, there's no real merit to this theory except some very obscure and kind of, like, reachy facts about the Emperor. But yeah, so that brings us to the now, where things are still terrible because, and we haven't talked about them much, the Eldar are still out there and they fucking hate humans. Literally think of us as unevolved monkey creatures. Like, we are pathetic in their perspective. And remember I said they had the whole Dark Eldar thing? They love rounding up entire kind of cities of people for their whole, hey, I can top myself off if I torture you correctly type of thing. And, like, I know I keep saying murder torture. They also are kind of prone to turning living things into furniture that's still alive.
Wait, hold on. That almost got. Did you say the furniture's alive?
Oh yeah, no, the Dark Eldar are very much into the whole idea where it's like, where you and I might buy a leather couch, the Dark Eldar, if they want to show how much money they're making, they go out and round up, like, I don't know, 20 human babies, and then through science reshape them into a couch. It's still technically 20 living babies.
Oh my god.
Remember when I said the Dark Eldar in a setting of everyone's the bad guy are like the baddest guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. In a setting where, like, one of the factions has literally 4 Cthulhus on their team, somehow the Dark Eldar are worse. And the side with the 4 Cthulhus isn't much better. Like, the Night Lords, the guys, the army led by murderous Batman, they'll also do similar stuff, but, like, they're not doing it for design reasons. They're just doing it because it's, like, the most effective form of warfare they've come up with, where it's like, no, we believe in, like, demoralizing people through extreme violence type of thing. Like, the best way to break an army is to break its spirit. We're really good at that. But yeah, so you got the Imperium, you got Chaos, and they're kind of doing their ongoing stalemate of trying to corrupt people to Chaos, and back and forth, and Space Marines fight each other, and through all of this, kind of variety of rules happen that break down Space Marines into smaller factions, and blah, 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 blah. None of this is super important to this conversation we're having. But so then in the third faction of the Xenos, you have the Eldar, the Eldare, and then you have the Tyranids. So Tyranids are Zerg. They are 100% Zerg, that down to the hive mind thing. They are where the Zerg come from, and they are multiple giant biofleets that have drifted into the Milky Way from outside the Milky Way, allegedly drawn by, remember the Astronomicon thing? The thing that allows people to travel through space?
Yes.
That's pulling them to it slowly. And I'm going to say a sentence that's not going to make a lot of sense. I need to explain it to you in greater detail. But the Tyranids eat worlds. Not literally, but when a Tyranid invasion of a planet happens, they suck every possible molecule of biomatter off of it. Like, they inhale the air because it might contain organisms. They drink the water. They eat the cattle. They pull all of the worms out of the dirt even, and leave the planet like a giant useless rock after they're gone, like devoid of any useful resources. And there's multiple fleets just kind of slowly making their way through the universe doing that, planet by planet. And if you want to get real philosophical, they're the closest to being the good guys because they have no goals. They're just there to eat everyone, and they're doing what comes naturally to them. And they have a whole hive mind thing and multiple fleets and super evolution, but that's more detail you want to go into. Then you also have the Tau, which are the other maybe good guys of the setting. They have this whole greater good thing. Like when they actually came out, they were undeniably the good guys, and people complained enough that they kind of got like darkened up a little bit. They have a whole kind of mind control thing maybe going on, and they're kind of cool. They are a species that showed up and went from basically kind of like killing each other with rocks to spacefaring in the span of 2,000 years. They're neat. They have Gundams and shit like that. They have a bunch of high technology stuff. They're a cool faction. They have no psychic powers though. And oh yeah, so I totally glossed over this. The way magic works in this setting is you're tapping into the warp via psychic, and every species has their own kind of level of psychic connection. Humans have big burny souls that are like super obvious in the warp and give them good psychic powers on occasional random people. These psychic powers, the more this connection to the warp may cause you to mutate horribly, and that's a whole problem. Like, it is possible for a human psyker, upon using their psychic powers the first time, to just explode into a mass of tentacles.
Okay.
Yeah, being a psyker is bad, and the Tau don't have any psychic powers. They've kind of like overcome everything through technology. Mentioned the Tyranids already. Oh yeah, so remember the Korks/Orcs I mentioned previously? Like a while back at this point, like one of the two factions made by the old ones.
I'm trying to, but yes, I remember the mention of it works.
Yeah,
but there is a lot of lore going on right now.
Yep,
so
there really is, and we've only scratched the surface of all this shit. Sadly,
are you fucking kidding me?
Remember, this is a set of stories designed to sell plastic toys.
Figure, yes, that's right.
Oh, there are sub factions to all of this. Like every single one of those Space Marine legions I told you about, I can probably talk about for an hour or so. But yeah, so orcs exist still. They've kind of devolved some. They're definitely not the good guys, but they're having the most fun in the setting. Orcs just kind of love a good fight, and they're kind of cool because they have no real goals as a species except to become the biggest and the baddest orc, and they have this cool thing going on called the Wa, where if enough orcs, like, this is not really how it works, but it's kind of how this works. If enough orcs believe something, it's true.
Well, so they can literally manifest shit? Like, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Not like manifest, but like orcs paint all their vehicles red because red makes things go faster, and every orc knows that, so it's true. Like, orcs don't, like, it's possible for an orc, like, there are several stories out there basically have the same vibe of like, the orcs were driving a buggy through the desert and the gas gauge hits 0, and the orc punches it and goes, nah, I just filled it up. And the rest of the orcs on the buggy go, yeah, I saw that happen, I think. And then suddenly the car has full gas again. So it's not exactly how it works, but it kind of is.
Okay.
So they're just kind of having fun. Like, the setting is terrible with lots of things to fight and punch and kick and eat, and that's what orcs like to do, so they do that. And they're actually a really cool version of orcs because they're technically plants. Like, the whole what makes orcs terrifying in this setting is that, like, they grow from basically mushroom spores, and if a plant has an orc infestation, it will probably always have an orc infestation because they kind of keep coming back.
Oh.
And yeah, they're neat that way because of how their technology works. Like, they have space flight. Their space flight is the equivalent of like redneck technology of like strapping 9 trailer homes to a rocket engine and then like duct taping all the windows shut and being like, yup, space sealed, and it works. They do cool shit like strap motors onto moons and use those as spaceships and shit. Like, they're a fun faction. Like, there's a whole chunk of them running around in pirate hats because that's what pirates do. They wear pirate hats. So of course they have pirate hats. Like, their economy is based around teeth. Orcs are constantly growing new teeth. And because of how orc culture works, they're constantly punching each other's teeth out. A stable economy if you ever have one. So, and last but not least of the kind of various major factions, also Leagues of Votan exist. I love them because they're space dwarves, and space dwarves are cool, and they have judgment tokens and going in the book, etc., but there's not much lore on them yet. They used to be called squats, but for a variety of reasons, that name got removed. They used to have kind of like a 80s biker vibe going on, and now they just straight up look like Space Marines from fucking StarCraft. Like, literally, it's why I like about them. They have big, chunky armor. But yes, there's not much to talk about them. Remember the Necrons I mentioned way the fuck back when we started talking about this?
Yeah, those are the ones who got mad at the original gods and they chose to support other gods.
Yeah, they made a deal and lost their souls and got cool ass metal bodies out of the deal.
Yeah, the metal bodies, but the metal bodies were also taken in some other shit.
Yeah, so they're still around. And by still around, I mean like their society, like they won their war. They were like, man, these Eldar are kind of kicking our ass. This sucks. We're all robots now legally. What if we just went to sleep until the universe ironed itself out type of thing? Like, what if we just kind of like went into stasis and took a long ass nap, a power nap, if you will, until everything blew over and like we could come back and be the technological god creatures we basically are. So, and I shit you not on this one, from Millennium Zero basically to we'll call Millennium 40, they were just asleep.
Take a little nappy nap.
Yeah, a little nappy nap in what are called tomb worlds. Basically, like millions, if possibly not billions, of Necron constructs, as they call their bodies, buried Egyptian pyramid style across hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of worlds, just waiting for the alarm to go off and the wake the fuck up to happen so they can rise. And they have begun to do that. And if you weren't thinking this situation was all ridiculous enough, like, if there's a technological powerhouse in the setting, it is the Necrons. Time fuckery is just a thing they do. Shooting black holes at people is just a thing they do. Killing stars because they didn't want to have to go around the star is just a thing Necrons can do, type of thing. And the only reason they haven't kind of get the fuck off my lawn, you kids, the entire rest of the setting is that they were asleep for so long, waking up has taken a while. So they're not all awake yet. But the Adeptus Mechanicus keeps wandering into their tomb worlds and waking up like a couple of them, and then like thousands of people on an expedition get wiped out by like one Necron Lord waking up and being like, why are these meat suits in my tomb? Why the fuck am I awake? Is the galaxy good for us again? But yeah, that's most of Warhammer 40,000.
Holy shit, that is...
And that's like the surface level of all of this. Like, everything I talked about, I could talk about in significantly more detail, and many other podcasts just talk about this in greater detail.
There was so much. Like, I appreciate the very in-depth stuff there, but holy shit, there was so much. Like, let's see. Let me see if I can remember some of the highlights. So, very beginning, this one race, pissed off at their original god, finds new god gives metal body also cursed, then they get, like, their souls taken. Then there are these elves, and they like to fucking suck everything, from what I gather.
Yeah, not quite that explicit, but yeah, in general, that's the gist of it so far.
Yeah, that fucking suck and kill. There we go. Or well, they
didn't start off that way, but like wind up there, yeah.
They wind up, but they eventually evolve into the next version of that, where they're turning living creatures into furniture, if you will.
Yep.
Then we've got orcs and other stuff. We got Primarchs, which are like the special characters. There's the Emperor of Man, which is like, I guess, this other ruler, which it starts to get all kind of hazy. There were 3 chaos gods, and literally through so much hedonism, there is now a 4th.
Yep, you are correct.
Just based off of hedonism alone from the elves. Shout outs to the elves for literally being the down bad, being so down bad they spawn their own god.
Yeah. When the thirst is real. Yeah. So Slanesh's whole tagline is "They who thirst."
Yeah, of course. I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Nurgle is literal cancer personified, if you will.
Yeah.
Then there's I can't remember the name of the first one, like Clash or
Corn.
There we go. Something with blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull god.
Indeed.
That one's
Throne,
there.
yes.
Yeah. Skulls for the skull, skulls for the skull throne. Yes. Let's see. There's about 20 Primarchs, and then some of them have been like brought in, wiped out, brought in, but you can kind of fill in the Primarchs with kind of your own if you want.
Yeah, someone evil. Yeah, there's 2 placeholders if you want to be your own self-insert type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. God, there's so much. Like, I'm trying to remember it, and literally I'm like, oh.
So, and let's take a quick rewind to, I guess, address kind of some of your favorite memes, I guess, on this topic.
Okay.
So I will put an image of up on the YouTube. Hi, if you're watching this, thank you for watching this. If you're listening to this, you're a Patreon supporter and got the audio only version of this.
Yeah.
But yes, so let's start with your favorite one. The Emperor of Mankind
creates the Thunder Soldiers, right?
Yes. So remember the Thunder Warriors I talked about, the first round of genetic super soldiers.
Yes, the first round of genetic super soldiers created by the Emperor of Man.
Yes. What's this actor's name again? I'm having a blanking moment.
Raul Julia.
Yeah,
he plays M. Bison in the really awful Street Fighter movie live action.
Mr. Julia's portrayal of M. Bison in Street Fighter has strong Emperor of Mankind energy. Or more accurately, the Emperor of Mankind has strong M. Bison energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, going back to kind of like the setting is absolutely terrible. Like the day Bison came to your village was the greatest day of your life, but for Bison it was Tuesday thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is how the Emperor views that whole unification war thing. Like it's like I'm trying to unify all of the humans, and if you just would stop acting out, I wouldn't have to murder your entire city. You did this to you. I'm the good guy in this genocidal crusade, not you, the victims. Me, the genocidal maniac.
Which makes sense because rule 2, no matter what, everything is just, was it absolutely dark?
That's rule 1. This is the most ridiculous setting possible. Yeah,
the most ridiculous setting possible. So it makes sense that it's always just going to be ridiculously comically bad. So yes, it makes sense that he would, yeah. Like if you're eating bread made from the bodies of your fallen comrades, that's a good day, as I recall what you said.
Yeah, there's a thing called corpse starch, which is people are recycled because they're full of useful nutrients, and yeah, they feed the military rations of corpse starch, which may just be your fellow soldiers reprocessed.
Yes. So that goes back to rule 1. So yeah, that tracks. That tracks with M. Bison, Raul Julia, Emperor of Man. Yes, that all makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, and like if I'm being honest, every single Primarch has strong M. Bison energy. And like in defense of the Primarchs, they're right. The day that them and their legion showed up at your planet was like a defining moment in your culture's civilization. But for them and their army, it was just Tuesday type of thing. Like,
yes.
The Primarchs and their armies conquer and wipe out and subjugate a lot of planets. They're very good at what they do. Turns out when you build a bunch of super soldiers for the explicit purpose of conquest, they're pretty good at it typically. And then build them armies of super soldiers to aid in that conquest and then like arm them appropriately. They get the job done. So to move on from that one to not my personal favorite of the 3 you shared with me, but like I think the one that kind of like finally put me in the okay, we have to fucking talk about this. The Night Lords and the Blood Angels one. So now knowing what the Night Lords are and the Blood Angels, do you get this meme a little bit better?
Yeah, I get it a little bit better. Yeah, I'm still trying to like process all of it, but yes, it's starting to all kind of track. Yes,
you have the Night Lords, the army led by Murder Batman, and the Blood Angels, the army led by Sanguinius, who are kind of opposites of each other, but like kind of the same.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that tracks. Which is funny because I think one of the comments in one of the videos there is like, it's the smallest difference between, was it Astralis, or how do you pronounce that? Astralis or ASTAT?
Astartes.
Astartes?
Yes. Sorry,
Yeah.
the official copywritten name for the Space Marines is Astartes.
Yeah. So it's, I guess one of the comments, which also now when you explain all of it, it makes sense, is it's the smallest difference between Astartes who help blind children and Astartes who help blind children.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no, the Night Lords are so, and kind of to show my hand on this one a little bit, like, I like the Chaos factions. I think the writing for them is often a lot better. And like, there are 3 books for the Night Lords that are really fucking good books. And like, I went into them being like, fucking Night Lord fans are lame. And I'm on the other side being like, you know who's pretty cool? The Night Lords. They are terrible people, but like, in this setting of grim darkness, of only war, the Night Lords are okay. I think they're kind of neat. Like an entire army of super soldiers whose catchphrase is, "We have come for you," as they're like there to do war crimes, is kind of cool. Like, and they're all there in like fucking gargoyle helmets and like midnight, like they call their armor midnight clad, and like they don't use the word day because their home planet, the sun never rises. They're like, and I've not seen you since last night, and they mean like that's how you tell time, not like since yesterday. And they recruit from nothing but criminals because Conrad Kurz is a fucking maniac. But yes, so the last and most important one of the 3 memes you sent me is when a Space Marine and Chaos Marines meet in battle. And so amongst these kind of big overarching factions we've mentioned, there's lots of little sub-factions. And there are way too many Space Marine factions to talk about in a useful way here. But one of the more prolific and famous and popular factions of Space Marines is called the Black Templar. And in a faction of extreme racists, the Black Templars are some of, if not the most racist Space Marines. They are insanely devout in the Emperor. And for a variety of reasons we don't have time to go into, they are constantly on crusade, and when you take a step back and look at it, are absolutely batshit insane. So, and you occasionally have moments where the army of people that worship literal space satans and like accept mutations and like engage in a bunch of insane activities because that's how their gods gift them, and they're like, oh, you're a follower of Slanesh, okay, cool, that means like enjoy your space drugs and other stuff, and like you invented sonic weapons because they're more aesthetically pleasing to use and shit like that. They occasionally look normal compared to how into what they do the Black Templars are. And that is my favorite of the 3 you sent me because it's absolutely insane how well it's done. So
yeah. I have more to send you, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, that's just, I'm not going to put these in the video because it kind of that's copyright infringement. But yes, it's, yeah. So before we started recording this, you asked like why there are so many like Joe Rogan quote ones of this and like Alex Jones ones. It's because often the people they're like using the dialogue from these people for are absolutely batshit insane factions that, like, again, because the setting is like satire cranked all the way to the ridiculous, it works because, like, no, that's what this faction of giant super soldiers honestly believes, and it's wrong there too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this all tracks. Okay.
Yep.
Like, explain with some of the context. Now it, like, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and the fandom for Warhammer has a problem where some people honestly, like, do not get that, again, it's a satire, it's inherently supposed to be humorous, it's written to be over the top, and, like, it's stupid and weird, and, like, enjoying it for the memes is the correct way to enjoy this ridiculous setting, despite the fact that there are way too many goddamn books that treat it way too seriously. But you kind of have to at that point. Like, the part of what makes it fun is it is portrayed in the most, like, no, this is all serious and all, like, life or death, and, like, if you're in on, like, be in on the joke. Please be in on the joke. We have a guy named Angron whose major character trait is he's really angry. Like, fuck it. We have an entire faction of Space Marines that went traitor that are now basically power armor full of dust, and they're Egyptian themed.
Yeah.
Please enjoy the jokes. Oh, do you want to know what people think most Chaos Gods are for Always Funny characters? Or Always Sunny characters?
I have a video that's specifically of that, but I'm curious to see what you have, because I think it's going to match what's in this video.
Well, do you want to take a guess at it, I guess, based off of what you've learned through this and stuff? Okay.
So, D would be the most bird-like one, and I can't remember.
Yep, that's Zeech, because she looks like a bird. That's the joke. Yeah. Yes, that's no more joke than you need.
Yeah. And then, what's the dude with the really high-pitched voice? I can't remember his name all of a sudden.
Charlie,
he's Nurgle.
Yep.
And I don't know about the other two.
Dennis is Slanesh, which means Mac is Korn, who's the war god, which means It makes all the sense.
Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, no, that tracks. Yes.
Yep. And then the joke is that probably Frank is the Emperor, which also makes a certain amount of sense.
Yeah, no, that all tracks.
I think he's Be'lakor, but you don't know who that is. We're not going to get into who Be'lakor is.
No, I don't know who that is. No.
Be'lakor's a literal demon that's like not part of one of the major chaos. Oh yeah, like there's other there's chaos stuff that's not allied directly with the chaos stuff. They're just on like the traitor side, and as a result, there's weirdness there too. But yeah, it's, as I've said several times, this all exists to sell inch tall plastic models.
Yep. Yeah, this is fun. I have a special appreciation now for some of these now that I have some context for it, because like I said, I was learning the initial lore from this. Now I have some extra.
Oh yeah, no, joking aside, I think it is one of the most interesting and kind of like, because it's so over the top settings for anything of this nature. Like there's a couple tabletop RPGs that actually use the setting. I'm excited for the new one. Previous ones have been okay at best. Like they've been kind of hit or miss. The setting is oddly hard to translate into anything that's not the war game. And that's because the war game has no plot to it. You're just fighting two armies. Like it's because the justification for all of this stuff is this ridiculous lore. It allows for the war game to just be like, yeah, I'm going to have my dude shoot at your dudes now. And whoever wins, I guess. It doesn't really matter in the grand meta narrative of things because millions of worlds, millions of battles happening simultaneously, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's only been a couple really good video games made off the setting, which seems crazy because it seems like it's rife with options. There's been not a lot of media that exists outside of books because it's kind of hard to capture the scope of this thing appropriately without having a giant budget to it. Maybe an Amazon thing coming in the near future, which might be interesting to see what winds up happening with that. But yeah, oh, Jesus, fuck. I thought I was kidding when I said this. Yeah, so there are... Remember the Horus Heresy thing I mentioned? That, like, time period I was talking about where it's like, yeah, there's this thing that happens to have, like, a big defining moment in the human existence of the setting, but, like, not that important for everyone else outside of it. I was wrong. There are 62 books that technically make up the Horus Heresy series.
Jesus Christ.
And they first started coming out in 2006. And we're recording this in September of 2023. And that count is as of February 2023. I think there's been like a book or two that came out since this count happened. I'm not counting them by hand, though. And that's not all the books. I've never read a Horus Heresy book because I don't care about Space Marines that much. I read a bunch of the other stuff that's not directly related to them. Yeah, there's some good books in there, too. Like the Night Lords books, I think they're really good. The one about the Necrons called The Infinite Divine is a really good book. It's one of my favorite characters, a guy named Trazyn, who's a Necron. That's also who's also Indiana Jones. But if Indiana Jones was a 7-foot-tall murder robot that was capable of immortality, hell of a book, hell of a character too. He may or not have Pokemon powers. is a hell of a setting. The fact that like people are aware of the setting, despite the fact that like they don't have to know anything about the setting to know weird bits and pieces about the setting, is something I always find fascinating. Like, and it does not need to be this prolific as it is, but it is, and it's kind of awesome for that result of it. And yeah.
Okay, I have to say though, like my favorite thing about this so far is the fact that you've clarified that this, everyone who knows this is actually a giant parody, like, or at least like a giant exaggeration kind of thing, like that makes everything kind of feel a lot better in context.
Yes, well, so that's the thing. Like, I guess like that's the one that I mentioned a couple times. It is supposed to be a parody. There are chunks of the fan base that unfortunately take it a little too seriously, or like don't have the media literacy to not get kind of, no, this is satire, like everyone is terrible, because like of course they are. Like you guys got mad that we actually made good guys in the setting, so we made them worse type of thing. Like it's the concept of grimdark is, I think it's one of those ones where it's supposed to be humorously over the top. Like it's one of these things where it's gory, it's horrific, it's absolute, like it's almost comical in the extent people go to make it just like the worst thing ever. And trust me, there are some the worst thing evers in this setting that we did not get into, like because reasons. Like I don't want the YouTube channel to get nuked from orbit if we talk about some of the stuff in it. Be like, yeah, it's not important to the overall arc of what this thing is. Like a mild one is that at one point one of the books talks about, remember the orcs I mentioned, the friendly soccer hooligan space orcs?
Yes, the ones who could manifest things into existence. Yeah, like a bunch of them collectively thinking of it.
There's a book where a group of humans come across a farm of humans because the orcs are raising people as cattle because they realized it was easier to make leather clothing out of human skin than other stuff.
Oh.
Yes. And it's just kind of a casual throwaway line in the book. Like, it's like, oh yeah, this is a thing. And you're like, I'm sorry, what?
Okay.
Yes, yeah, it's an expansive setting where, like, I think the best book, I think, like Star Wars, it has the problem where the more special the character the book is about, or the kind of story you're telling is about, the less interesting it is, because like, oh, it should be world shattering. Like some of the coolest stuff I've read in the setting has been like dude who happens to be a detective on a planet inside the Imperium and is trying to be a detective on a planet that's literally miles tall, and like the ridiculousness of the setting scales down to the city stuff too, where they have things called hive cities, where it's like billions of people living in one city stacked on top of each other, and the horribleness that comes with that, and the ruling elites and whatnot. And like, yeah, there's so much we didn't get into that I think makes the setting interesting too. Like I felt compelled to talk about this kind of through the negative modifier lens, because occasionally people talk about like what makes a good setting, and there is something about the Warhammer 40,000 setting that's kept it going for a long ass time. Again, as we mentioned, as I've joked a couple times, this exists to sell plastic ass toys, and I stopped really collecting them decades ago at this point. I still read the books because I think the books are kind of cool with some frequency. A lot of them are just books to kind of push the toys, but like occasionally there's some really cool stories in them type of thing. Like it's a setting that lends itself to some just ridiculous over-the-top cool stories occasionally. And yeah, if you ever find yourself looking for kind of inspiration, there's some really good Warhammer books out there, some really good 40K books out there. Warhammer books are even better, but we didn't talk about Warhammer today. We talked about Warhammer 40,000. Any questions, I guess? Like, I feel like I've talked way too goddamn much. And
bro,
yeah.
I'll be honest with you. Like, if I even had questions, I wouldn't know where to 100% begin on it, because there was so much.
Accurate.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure I got some of the stuff slightly wrong too. Like, by its very nature, the setting is kind of, it's interesting. As I've gotten older, the setting has gotten locked down a little bit more, and there's kind of various takes on that. Like, a lot of what I talked about has happened in the last like 15 years or so, give or take, from a solidifying in the story. It's like the big kind of picture stuff's always been there, but like a lot of fleshing out of the details wasn't there when I first got into the hobby. It was kind of like, why'd you pick this faction? I thought they looked cool. Or, why are you afraid of this kid at school? Because he plays Dark Eldar. What's so scary about that? He's a 14-year-old that chose to play Dark Eldar. Don't trust him.
Yeah, Dark Eldar for a 14-year-old would be kind of fucking sussy ass vibes. Yeah, that's fair.
But also maybe he gets the joke of like, why are you playing them? It's just fun playing the worst faction, like the evilest faction. I respect that.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. I just think they're cool is not the correct response there, though. But yeah. Thank you for joining us for another Beyond the Table. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Again, if you're listening to this in audio only, thank you for being a Patreon member or being a Patreon supporter. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a like, etc., etc. If you like this, let us know, and we can do more shit like this. I fully admit, from an algorithm standpoint, this definitely benefits us because Warhammer 40,000 stuff doesn't do terribly on YouTube, but also don't expect a lot more of this. We're not becoming a Warhammer lore channel. There's plenty of those other ones out there if you want recommendations. Let us know down in the comments, and I'll be happy to direct them. I'll direct you their way. But yeah, maybe we'll do more of this in the future. I personally think you'd enjoy the fantasy setting a lot because there's just it is the same level of ridiculousness, but like in a pure fantasy setting, and like it has some of the best versions, in my view, of some of the kind of like typical fantasy races. Like the dwarves of the fantasy setting, I think, are the most interesting thing. It's like, yeah, they're still tokeny dwarves. They live under mountains. They have big holds. They have some kind of technological advancements, but stuff like that. But also they keep giant books of grudges that go back generations of like people that have wronged them and like go to war if enough wrongs rack up and stuff. Like they literally have ongoing enemies lists.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. Again, hope you enjoyed. And remember, Warhammer 40,000 exists. Sell plastic inch tall soldier figures.
And it's satire.